The crystal chandelier sways gently, even without wind. In the first-class dining room of the Titanic, time seems suspended between a silver spoon and a civilized silence. You observe everything like someone arriving late to a theater play. The impeccable attire, the faces lit by candlelight, the scent of burnt butter mixed with expensive perfume. The environment gleams, but something in it creaks, as if the excess of luxury conceals a structural insecurity. Spoiler, it actually does. It's April 1912. In theory, you're aboard the safest, most expensive, most outrageously proud ship human engineering has ever dared to spawn. In practice, you're about to face a 10-course menu that would be considered a frontal assault on the modern digestive system. Around you, the rich smile sparingly, because smiling too much wrinkles the face. Men with waxed mustaches pull out chairs for ladies in dresses heavier than third-class luggage. A quartet discreetly plays something no one recognizes, but everyone pretends to know. At the center of the table, bread, delicate breads, folded like European origami, butter curled into little mounds resembling snow sculptures. Beside them, 3 forks, 2 knives, 1 spoon, and a strange sensation of being about to commit a faux pas of transatlantic proportions. You're not alone, of course. The waiter, gloved, always gloved, hovers behind your chair, like a ghostly presence. He observes but doesn't judge. Or maybe he does, just with British discretion. Beside you, a lady whispers that she's looking forward to the terrain de foie gras with black truffles. You smile and think maybe a broth would go down better. And here it comes, Konsam Olga, a translucent, almost golden broth, with thin slices of cucumber and a faint onion scent. French name, Russian soul, flavor, ... hot, very hot. You blow gently, trying not to look like a peasant before the court. The problem, the consomme is served in a narrow cup, hard to handle, as if designed to test your dignity. That was just the first course. First-class dinner on the Titanic wasn't just a meal. It was a social marathon, a silent and stiff performance where every bite had to be in harmony with etiquette, posture, and the right wine. Getting drunk was acceptable, as long as it happened with elegance. Complaining about the fish, never. They say the menu was influenced by the famous chef, Auguste Escoffier, though there's no consensus on that. Some historians insist Titanic's kitchen was a pale imitation of French glamour. Others swear it was excellent. Like every good tragedy, the details dissolve into debate. The truth is, there was something uncomfortable about all that pomp. The dinner was a choreography of excess, a parade of thick sauces and exotic meats that, honestly, few knew how to appreciate. Dining there was a ritual of belonging, not of pleasure. An attempt to mask, with lavender and lobster, the universal fear of not being aristocratic enough. And then there was time, 3 hours of dinner. 3 hours sitting upright, alternating between forks and restrained expressions. At some point, the idea of skipping the next course and heading straight to dessert seems tempting, but that wouldn't be proper. And on the Titanic, propriety came before digestion. Interesting how the contrast between the dining room's glow and the menu's enigma works as a metaphor for the journey itself. Everything gleams until it sinks. Everything is refined until it tires. Everything is perfect until ... Well, by the way, if you happen to enjoy this kind of gastronomic stroll between the sublime and the absurd, it might be worth staying in touch. Leave a comment below. Say which of these dishes you'd politely refuse. And who knows, sign up for the next banquet. As the waiter clears the empty plate, with the elegance of someone dancing a minuet, the second act approaches. There's pigeon on the horizon. Before you can breathe between a sip of white wine and a silent sigh of exhaustion, the next course arrives. It comes wrapped in a discreet mist of heat and false sophistication. Pigeon breast with Madeira sauce. Yes, pigeon. The same one you avoid in parks with a quick step and squinting eyes. But here, on the Titanic, pigeon is noble. It's served on English porcelain, flanked by glazed baby potatoes and a parsley leaf that won't be touched. The Madeira sauce trickles slowly over the dark meat, trying to seem like a deliberate choice rather than a desperate attempt to mask the bird's slightly metallic flavor. Curiously, pigeon was considered a delicacy at aristocratic tables during the Belle Epoque. Eating game meat was the culinary equivalent of owning a castle or a title, a way to declare to the world, or at least to the dining room, that you were above mediocrity. Only ironically, the taste was often, well, let's say earthy, and the Madeira sauce did what it could. While you decide between trying it or pretending you're too full. It's worth knowing, the custom of stuffing birds with other birds, known as engustration, was trendy at the time. Some dinners featured layered recipes. Quail inside a chicken, inside a duck, inside a turkey. A matryoshka of feathers and proteins. On the Titanic, they didn't go that far, at least not officially. But there are records still not fully confirmed of an experimental turducken prepared for an eccentric American passenger who insisted on homey tastes. No one knows for sure if the dish was served. What is known is that the smell lingered in the kitchen for 2 days. And speaking of the kitchen, the utensils used at this dinner, though gleaming, were often made of nickel-plated silver. Sounds elegant, until you find out that nickel, when in contact with acidic sauces, can alter the flavor. Many guests blamed the chef. In truth, it was basic chemistry and a slight logistical oversight. The pigeon, there on your plate, stares at you. It was hunted or raised for a dinner that is less a celebration and more a ritual. You taste it. The flavor is dense, almost emotional. A mix of damp earth and imperial ambition. It's the taste of a Europe that has not yet collapsed. A gentleman beside you praises the texture with restrained enthusiasm. The lady across pretends to enjoy it. The waiter, always him, serves more wine. Probably a robust Bordeaux red that pairs better with the idea of pigeon than with the pigeon itself. At that moment, you start to realize that the discomfort of dinner isn't just digestive. It's existential. The food wants to be art, but is above all, a performance of class. Eating has become theater, and the stage, though luxurious, is cold. There are historians who disagree about the preparation of the Madeira sauce. Some suggest it was made with bone broth reduced for hours. Others argue that, in a rush, they used a French industrial extract, like Magie avant la lettre. As always, historical truth floats like steam over a pot. As the plates are cleared and the orchestra shifts to a forgotten waltz, you look around. The dinner continues. The luxury continues. And the pigeon, well, that stays with you. In the next round, we'll talk about those who didn't dine with porcelain, but with reused cans and stale bread. The cruise banquet. Get ready for a behind-the-scenes dive. The pigeon is gone, but the impression, remains. A lean bird disguised as an imperial phoenix, covered in a sauce as thick as varnish. You lean back slightly in your chair, trying to conceal the onset of an aristocratic burp, as the next course is announced with the rhythmic clinking of utensils being replaced. It's been nearly 2 hours of dinner, and the ethyllic protein marathon advances mercilessly. Now it's time for lamb fillet with mint sauce, though the waiter announces it in French, with an accent bordering on theatrical performance. The meat is tender, yes, but bathed in a viscous green that resembles Victorian toothpaste. On the side, glazed peas, halved with surgical precision, as if they were about to be autopsied, rather than eaten. For some reason, beyond reason, the Edwardian elite had a particular fixation on oddly colored dishes, green sauces, purple puddings, orange jellies. Everything looked like it had come from an impressionist palate in crisis. Aesthetics came before appetite. Taste was a technical detail. As you stare at the plate, a gentleman beside you clinically describes his latest trip to India. No, he didn't go beyond Gibraltar. But his wife bought an oriental rug in Southampton, and since then he considers himself a cosmopolitan man. The meat is good, but you feel no pleasure, only performance. Eating here is like wearing a tight tuxedo. Elegant, but not comfortable. And the lamb, poor thing, pays the price of status. It's curious to think that the previous bird, the pigeon, was once served at royal weddings and palace banquets, despite its current reputation as a rat with wings. That says a lot about how time rewrites the value of things. In the early 20th century, having pigeon on your plate was a sign of refinement. Today, it's a sign of culinary desperation, or a very conceptual chef. There was also the so-called duck salmi on the Titanic menu, a rustic stew with red wine and wild mushrooms. But the records vary. Some surviving menus mention it, others don't. Some say the dish was replaced last minute due to a lack of fresh ingredients, a sign that even on the world's most expensive ship, logistics had its stumbles. As you try to remember which fork to use for the vegetables, spoiler, the middle one, your thoughts wander to an intriguing detail. Many of these meats were only partially refrigerated. Yes, the Titanic had cold storage rooms, but the technology was still in its infancy. The meat could arrive at the table, slightly mature. An olfactory experience that the sauce tried, with difficulty, to mask. In fact, there was a strange kind of pride in serving slightly aged meats. A sign of sophistication, they said. What we'd now call a suspicious smell was then interpreted as intense and earthy aroma. You take a deep breath. Around you, the dining room remains undisturbed. The orchestra changes tempo, the waiters glide silently, and the guests continue to pretend that everything is absolutely delicious. No one dares to say they'd rather have a simple sandwich without sauces or pomposity. But that silent wish will soon be contrasted by a much less gilded reality. Because down below, behind the curtains and beyond the porcelain, another meal is taking place. Less noble, more real. That of those who sustain the show, but don't take part in it. In the next part, we'll walk the corridors and descend into the kitchen, where real food was made and eaten without ceremony. The crew's invisible banquet awaits. The Titanic's kitchen is a realm of its own. Humid, hot, full of steam and orders murmured through clenched teeth. Nothing gleams here. The pots are as large as barrels, and the smell is a pungent collage of garlic, fat boiling meat, and wet cloth. You walk through this space without first-class gloves, without crystal, without elegance. Here, luxury dissolves into thick broths and calloused hands. While the nobility in the main hall chews its Madeira-sauced pigeon, down here the food must be efficient, fast, and energizing. The Titanic's crew, over 900 people, was fed on a completely different menu. Forget foie gras. Think salted meat, potatoes, boiled to exhaustion, and black tea as strong as a verdict. You see a young man in a wrinkled apron distributing portions of stewed meat in an improvised line. Beside him, a pile of bread hard enough to support a small sculpture. No multiple utensils, no linen napkins. Everyone grabs what they can, sits wherever there's space, and eats in silence, not out of elegance, but exhaustion. Curiously, leftovers from first-class dishes had a noble destiny. They were recycled. In some cases, repurposed into meals for second or third class. The lamb broth became the base for a thinner soup. The bones went into stock. Fish trimmings, if still reasonable, were seasoned with curry and distributed to the sailors. Yes, the Titanic had its own avant la mode food repurposing system. There were, of course, exceptions. The officers ate a bit better. They had access to simple desserts and generous portions. Still, refinement was more of a concept than a reality. Plates came chipped, butter was rare, beer was diluted, and sugar, ... Well, sugar was guarded like white gold. Among kitchen helpers, communication happened in code. First-class waiters, for instance, didn't eat the same food as the cooks. They had access to lukewarm meals, but cold in emotion. Potatoes, meat, vegetables boiled without salt, enough not to faint between courses. In the dishwashing section, meanwhile, The scene was almost poetic in its misery. They ate from what was left on serving trays. Sometimes, discrete bites between one pile and another. A piece of pudding here, a forgotten sip of wine there. There was even a tacit hierarchy about who could steal what, and when. Even further down, in third class, the area for humble families, workers, and immigrants, the menu was simple, but not as grim as often assumed. Single dishes, meat stew with vegetables, bread with butter, oatmeal, porridge, cheddar cheese, frugal, but nutritious. Some records indicate that, ironically, third-class meals had more caloric value than those in first class. After all, the goal was to keep everyone alive and functioning. The difference, the total absence of glamour. And some say many third-class passengers, upon hearing about the dishes served to the rich, chuckled quietly, because yes, you might crave lobster, ... But pigeon with green sauce. A curious, little discussed fact is that part of the ship's Indian crew brought their own hidden spices. Small tins of curry, black pepper, and cinnamon. They discreetly mixed them into mess hall soups to give flavor to what otherwise tasted like soggy cardboard. These practices weren't in the official manual, which is likely why they worked so well. The Titanic's food history is, at its core, a story of contrast. From top to bottom, from gold to iron. And while in the gala hall, guests pretended to adore difficult flavors. Down here, in the warm shadows of the kitchen, every bite was real. As you watch a cook lick his fingers after tasting a sauce, unapologetically, unashamed, you realize that perhaps this is the ship's most honest food. But honesty doesn't serve aristocracy. And up there, dinner continues, with more courses arriving. Social hunger has not yet been satisfied. In the next act, the menu reveals itself in full, a nearly punitive sequence of dishes and expectations. The waiter glides beside you like a well-trained shadow. Dish number 5. You've already lost count. The wine has changed once again, now something sweeter, perhaps a German white, with an indecipherable name. And the dish in front of you looks like a varnished garden. Warm asparagus with hollandaise sauce. The sauce is thick, yellow, almost uncomfortable in its opulence. The asparagus is a bit too soft, as if it has lived longer than it should have. You look around and realize that everyone keeps eating. No one questions the pace, the quantity, the fact that you've already gone through fresh oysters, consomme, lamb, pigeon, fish with creamy sauce, and now lukewarm vegetables with the texture of cloth. All that, and there are still 4 dishes to go. The gala dinner in Titanic's first class wasn't just long. It was meticulously choreographed in 10 acts. It began with a cold starter, passed through soups, fish, meats, vegetables, bread, cheeses, desserts, and coffee. There was even a remise en bouche, as if the mouth needed encouragement to continue. For a modern stomach, it would be a catastrophe. But for Edwardian standards, it was just Tuesday. The logic was simple. Each dish served to demonstrate wealth, not to actually feed. Eating a little of everything and pretending to enjoy it was the expected behavior. Finishing a dish, asking for seconds, a scandal, refusing, a diplomatic offense. Curiously, there are reports that some passengers discreetly carried digestive tablets in their purses or tailcoat pockets. It was the only way to survive over 3 hours of dining without risking collapse between the salad and the peach tart. Speaking of tart, it will come later. There are still cheeses to face, as well as a peach ice cream with a flavor so artificial, it could be mistaken for second-rate French perfume. In the meantime, small distractions appear. A toast, a comment about the weather in New York, as if that were a certainty. A bored sigh at the sight of the 6th fork of the night. And the dishes keep coming. Grilled fish with Mornay sauce, foie gras pâté with truffles, Duchess potatoes, glazed peas. Beautiful names for lukewarm versions of an idea of abundance. Few remember, But the Titanic carried more than 75,000 kilos of fresh meat, 40,000 eggs, 8,000 cigars, and a ton of onions. A food logistics operation that would make a small country jealous. And all of it to serve dinners like this, where refinement stifled appetite. It's likely not all dishes were finished. Some reports suggest that many guests left the table before dessert. Others merely picked and chatted, turning the dinner into more of a visual event than a gastronomic one. But the menu existed. It was printed, distributed on thick paper with golden letters. And like any status symbol, its purpose wasn't to be fully lived, but flaunted, like a mansion with more rooms than people, or a ship with more crystal glasses than lifeboats. The sense of heaviness grows, not just in the stomach, but in the head. There's something surreal about eating this much for no reason other than because one can. You think about that as you push a piece of fish with the smaller fork, or maybe the larger one. You've lost track of etiquette. And then, almost like a mirage, the ice cream arrives. Peach ice cream, with a texture that resembles fresh plaster. The spoon slides lazily, and the dessert melts slowly, as if it too were tired. By now, the wine has dulled the senses. Conversations repeat. Laughter seems fake. The final dishes, like the petit four and coffee, feel more like relief than celebration. And dinner finally ends. Or almost. Because after the banquet comes the digestion. And that part, no one applauds. In the next part, we'll shift perspective. We'll talk about teeth, or the lack thereof, and how that influenced the experience of chewing foie gras by candlelight. At this point in the evening, while the chandeliers still shine with the arrogance of polished brass, and the cutlery reflects light, as if it had something to say, the true dilemma of the gala dinner emerges. Chewing, not metaphorically, actual chewing. A mechanical, repetitive, essential activity. And a bit comical, when most of the first-class guests wear smiles that don't belong to their original jawbones. You observe a refined gentleman to your left. He smiles discreetly, brings a truffle to his mouth, and chews with rehearsed, gentle, almost reverent movements. His dentures, custom-made by a London artisan, cost as much as a piano. But in the end, they're still just a piece of ivory, or articulated porcelain, trying to conquer a piece of pigeon meat with thick sauce. On the Titanic, dental matters were a collective secret, guarded more carefully than the wine list. The first-class generation had grown up without fluoride, without efficient brushes, with no notion of modern oral hygiene. Sugar, a luxury available since birth, showed no mercy. The mouths were beautiful, but inside, fragile. It was the pinnacle of aesthetics, and the failure of enamel. Curiously, much of the cutlery used was silver, and the dishes were Wedgwood porcelain, imported especially for the ship. Supreme quality tableware, decorated with crests, gilded frames, and rims that no one noticed, because all eyes were on dentures, trying not to slip. There's a now questioned account of a first-class passenger who allegedly dropped her upper denture during dinner. She supposedly whispered to the waiter, who silently retrieved the item with a napkin and returned it as if it were a brooch. Elegance in its purest form, or almost. The absence of natural teeth also explains certain menu choices. Overly soft dishes, purees, muslins, meats cooked for hours. Smooth textures, easy to chew without compromising composure. Sauce was king, not because it was flavorful, but because it was a social lubricant. There was even a tacit agreement between cooks and guests. Nothing too crunchy, nothing that required force. The lamb crust could be broken with a spoon. The fish, breakable at a touch. The bread, purposely made a bit moister. A menu designed more to slide than to resist. But the elite's teeth didn't live on limitations alone. Some dentures were true works of art, inlaid with gold, adjusted with Swiss precision. An American lady, known for her diamond necklace and slight lisp, Allegedly, had her prosthesis made in Paris, in a blue velvet-lined case. They say that after each dinner, she would rinse it with cognac and recite Shakespeare in front of the mirror. Fact or fantasy? Impossible to know. Academia, as always, disagrees. Meanwhile, downstairs, teeth, or the lack thereof, weren't a matter of vanity, but survival. Many in third class ate, with whatever they had, a sturdy set of molars, a patient fork, or, when necessary, instinct. The porridge was served hot, and that was enough. Back in the main hall, the next course appears. Stilton cheese with buttered crackers. Fortunately, the texture is crumbly and creamy. The waiter serves it with precision. The guests feign joy. You chew slowly, with more care than desire, and think about how decadence can be disguised as refinement. That maybe the true luxury isn't the dish in front of you, but the ability to eat without fear that something might unexpectedly leap from your mouth. In the next part, we'll leave the teeth and the cheeses behind and dive into the golden or iron rules of Edwardian etiquette. Because neither the pigeon, nor the wine, nor the French dentist could save you if you crossed your knife the wrong way. Not every dish is the greatest challenge of a dinner. Sometimes, it's the silence. And on the Titanic, silence was cultivated with the same precision as the vineyards of Burgundy. Edwardian etiquette, which governed every movement at the table, was less a handbook of good manners and more an aesthetic penal code. A posture mistake could doom you to social ostracism more than a public digestive collapse. You hold the fork as if about to sign a treaty. The knife rests in your right hand, blade facing inward. As tradition dictates, a tradition no one explains, but everyone follows. Cutting food with the wrong hand, or glancing at your neighbor's plate, were transgressions worthy of sharp glares and muffled whispers. Around you, guests chew with almost mechanical synchronicity. The dominant sound is the clinking of cutlery against porcelain and the muffled music of the string quartet. Conversation, yes, but only between courses. During tasting, silence is ideal, as if the palate needed quiet to function. The woman across from you, with a pearl necklace and serene expression, holds her napkin on her lap with the ease of someone trained for it all her life. She doesn't look around, doesn't gesture too much, and never lifts her elbows. Posture is everything. Eating well, a detail. Etiquette also dictated the pace of the meal. Eating too fast was vulgar. Too slowly, affected. The ideal was to finish with the majority, not a second before, not after. A timing game more precise than the captain's pocket watch. There were rules for everything. How to drink water, never lift the elbow. How to dab the lips, never with the center of the napkin. Even how to rest cutlery at the end diagonally, blades inward, on the plate. Yes, even forks had a choreographed moment of repose. And then there was the bread. Bread wasn't cut with a knife. It was torn with fingers, in small pieces, with controlled gestures. Spreading butter, only on the piece to be eaten immediately. Spreading it on the whole slice was a sign of emotional instability and possible plebeian origin. For women, the oppression was even more refined. One was not to finish the dish, nor comment on the flavor. The feminine role at the table was moderation, delicately nibbling, smiling gently, and agreeing in silence. Eating with enthusiasm was improper. Liking a dish too much, a sign of lacking finesse. Better to leave half, even if hungry, than to appear satisfied. And the men, they were expected to pour wine for the ladies, pull out chairs, but never talk business, health, or politics during dinner. Acceptable topics included gardening, cricket, weather, and recent travels to British colonies. Curiously, there was an obsession with utensils. The number of cutlery items laid out in first class bordered on comical. Oyster fork, clear soup spoon, fish knife, starter fork, meat knife, dessert spoon, ice cream spoon, fruit fork. Getting lost among them was easy. Using the wrong one, unacceptable. Some more insecure passengers even rehearsed before boarding crash etiquette courses to avoid floating embarrassment. There's a story, unverified, like many, that a Canadian magnate brought his own cutlery aboard the Titanic. Not out of a need for comfort, but to ensure he only used what was necessary. A silent protest against excess. Or perhaps just laziness to learn. You think about this as you face the next dish. Something creamy, again. Another wine, another protocol toast. The night continues, and formality weighs heavier than the meat. But there's something comforting in this absurd choreography. The predictability. The repetition. The fact that, even in the middle of the ocean, even amidst excess and pretension, someone still cares about the direction of the napkin's fold. In the next part, we'll descend to the Titanic's wine cellar, where bottles older than most passengers rested, because nothing pairs better with rules of etiquette than a good sip of red, and a slight forgetting of them. In the cold hold of the Titanic, beneath the first-class cabins and far below the ballrooms where the eighth wine of the evening is now being served, rests a small bottled cathedral, the wine cellar, a sanctuary for 1,500 bottles, each with a distinct label, a different accent, and a promise of brief forgetfulness. You imagine the sound of corks popping above. A bottle of Chateau Margaux slides out of a silver bucket. A white Sauternes accompanies dessert. An old port is opened for coffee, as if the dinner's end couldn't arrive sober. The wines don't follow the food, they command the experience. Each sip is a pause, an alcoholic sigh, a chance to give the night a sheen that digestion is already beginning to crack. Curiously, the Titanic had a wine list as vast as many luxury hotels of the time. There were French labels, of course, but also German and Hungarian. Sweet wines, dry wines, champagnes in abundance. Even claret, the red beloved by the English aristocracy, was part of the parade. Consumption was generous. It's estimated that over 15,000 liters of wine were loaded for first class alone. Not counting the whiskeys, liqueurs, brandies, and the ever-present sherry, served before any conversation began. There was enough alcohol to drown all fears, except those brought by an iceberg. The most ironic part, most of these wines lasted less than the passengers. Many went down with the ship, along with the dishes, cutlery, orchestras, and evening gowns. Years later, divers would recover some bottles, some intact, others shattered by the pressure. One or two were even tasted, the flavor, described as mysterious, briny, and a bit dead inside. Of course, not everyone drank for pleasure. There was a particular kind of silent intoxication in that room, one of restraint. Men who refilled their glasses faster than acceptable, but silently. Women who pretended not to like wine, but accepted just a little with an expression that masked relief. Etiquette, always, dictated even intoxication. Laughing too much was acceptable, as long as it was in French. Saying incoherent things, fine with a Viennese accent. Spilling a glass, only if it was crystal. Class wasn't about sobriety, but the way one stumbled. There's also the curious case of Captain Smith. On his last night, he allegedly accepted a glass of red wine, a rare thing, and toasted with some passengers. The scene is recorded in fragmented memories, and, as usual, there's controversy. Some say it was wine, others, brandy. Still others swear it was merely tea with a suspicious hue. Truth evaporates among versions. Meanwhile, a waiter refills your glass with a chilled, slightly fruity white. You drink, the alcohol casts a comforting haze over the night's rigidity. The hall looks more beautiful. Jokes make more sense. The pigeon from earlier seems like a distant dream. But the most intriguing thing is realizing that even while tipsy, everyone continues the performance. No one allows themselves to truly relax. Luxury demands effort. And wine, in this context, is just another costume accessory. You let the glass rest. The stem still vibrates slightly on the table, as if something outside had touched it. A current, perhaps. Or anticipation. In the next part, we'll dive into the story behind the mysterious fish on the menu, and the French chef, who considered all British food a culinary tragedy. Iceberg or not, between one glass and another, one toast and another, one restrained smile and another even more false, the fish arrives. It's one of the central dishes on the Titanic's first-class menu, yet also one of the most forgotten and, ironically, most controversial among historians. After all, what fish was it? The official menu printed on the night of April 14, 1912, reads, "Poached salmon with muslin sauce." But there are records that some guests received something entirely different, cod, with buttercream. Others even mention a smoked haddock, a type of fish that sounds more like an insult than a culinary choice. The truth, uncertain. The Titanic's kitchen was a machine of noble improvisation. Fish came from Ireland, the English coast, the North Atlantic, and from Luck. The supply was vast, but not immune to time, weather, and the sea's will. When the salmon didn't arrive in good condition, another fish took its place. As long as the sauce was the same, and the waiter could pronounce the name in French, no one complained. The mousseline sauce, in turn, was a variation of the already complicated hollandaise, with whipped cream added at the end. Light, airy, delicately unstable. A bit like the Titanic itself. Any temperature, error, and the sauce became a tragedy in the form of curdling. But the true character of this chapter is the French chef on board, Charles Proctor, who, despite the anglicized name, trained with disciples of Escoffier, and held a firm opinion, the British didn't know how to eat. He said this in whispers, between one tray and another, while adjusting seasoning with an extra pinch of sarcasm. Proctor was responsible for overseeing the first-class kitchen, which employed dozens of assistants, cooks, and pastry chefs. Though he followed a menu approved by the White Star Line, he often tweaked recipes not to offend the French palate. Translation: he swapped cream for wine, broth for butter, and anything to English for something more palatable. The tension between French cuisine and British customs was real. The English elite liked the look of continental cuisine, but missed the comforting taste of a well-roasted meat. The result: many dishes were hybrids, French in name, British in soul. And the fish with muslin sauce is perhaps the best example. A salmon that dreamed of being sophisticated, but drowned in its own sauce. There's a curious footnote in the White Star records, a small issue with the ice supply days before departure. This may have compromised the freshness of the fish. Which means, indirectly, that the salmon dish served at the gala dinner may have been, shall we say, a bit too aromatic. But no one dared complain. After all, complaining about food on the Titanic was like complaining about gravity, a useless and tasteless gesture. The irony, of course, is that while the fish was served on porcelain plates with gold detailing, somewhere in the back kitchen, someone was trying to mask the smell with fresh lemon. The same lemon that garnished the oysters at the start. And make no mistake, not even the French chef was fully satisfied. There's a letter attributed to Proctor, written before the voyage, in which he expresses his frustration at working with second-rate ingredients and a brigade that barely knows how to whip cream. The letter ends with a telling phrase. "They want Paris, but they gave me Southampton." You finish the fish with diplomatic effort. The wine helps. The waiter clears the plate, and table conversation returns to its usual comfort. Trivialities, polite laughter, more wine. No one mentions the fish. It vanishes like a dissonant note in a symphony everyone pretends is perfect. But the night still holds surprises, sweet, slippery, and absurdly molded. Because in the next part, you'll be introduced to Titanic's desserts. And none of them respect the laws of physics. Dinner, at last, begins to slow down. There's a collective sigh that isn't quite audible, but hangs in the air like tea steam. The moment of desserts. Not that anyone is still hungry. Hunger, here, is a vulgar word. What exists is the social willingness to keep eating a ritual, ornamental, courteous hunger. And with that, they arrive. The jellies. But not just any jelly. No brightly colored packets shaken in the fridge. We're talking about artistic jellies, molded with near military precision into shapes of castles, fruits, flowers, and occasionally animals we'd now consider too exotic for dessert. You observe a trembling tower of port wine jelly with candied fruit. Beside it, a kind of lilac lagoon made of lavender and whipped cream. There's a swan molded in sugar, and a pyramid of profiteroles that looks ready to collapse with any overly enthusiastic sigh. In fact, the pinnacle of this parade is the Waldorf pudding, a dense apple, walnut, and spice cake, topped with hot syrup and whipped cream. But the true showstopper is the fig pudding, served with a thin edible gold leaf on top. That's right, gold. Not for taste, it has none, but for status. After all, if it's going to shine, let it shine all the way to dessert. First-class desserts on the Titanic had a clear function: to enchant. They didn't need to be practical, let alone functional. They were ephemeral sculptures, testaments to how much someone could pay to eat something no one fully understood. Curiously, jelly was a symbol of technological progress. Agar-agar jelly, used for boulder moldings, had become popular among chefs who sought to surprise their diners with desserts that danced. There was a certain pleasure in watching something tremble on a plate, without ever losing shape, a balance that, ironically, the ship beneath those plates wouldn't maintain for long. You touch a spoon to the surface of a light pink jelly. It yields with a subtle, almost timid sound and reveals inner layers with suspended fruit. It looks like an edible stained glass window. The taste is sweet, a bit alcoholic, slightly strange, like childhood syrup served on French porcelain. Nearby, a gentleman tries to cut a rhubarb tart, and the crust offers enough resistance to require physical effort. His denture clearly disapproves. A young woman smiles, delighted by a tricolor parfait, balanced like a miniature Roman column. There are also ice creams. Many ice creams. The Titanic had its own ice production machines, and stored ice cream in various flavors: peach, vanilla, currant. Some, unfortunately, melted before reaching the table. Others arrived hard as marble. But no one dared complain. The gesture of receiving the ice cream was enough. Eating it was optional. A little-known curiosity. The molds used for these desserts were shipped from France and weighed more than some carry-on luggage. They came in the shape of flowers, fruits, Greek temples, even miniature towers. Some historians suspect that the chocolate pudding, served on the final dinner, was molded in the shape of a ship. The coincidence, of course, is unsettling, and the veracity remains disputed. You watch it all with a kind of tenderness. There's something childish in this moment. A hall full of richly dressed adults, wine-dazed, chewing on colorful things that jiggle. It's almost a puppet theater, where no one wants to be the first to stand up. The final spoonful of dessert comes with a new silence, a silence of full stomachs, intoxicated minds, bodies tired of pretending elegance. Coffee is on its way, with cookies too small for the task they're meant to perform. But before sleep arrives, one last act remains. The menu of the final night, the one that became famous not for its dishes, but for being the last, the true final banquet. It is Sunday, April 14th, 1912, on the first-class lounge clock. The hands move with the solemnity of those who don't yet know what's about to happen. Or they do, but prefer to keep their composure. Dinner begins, like all others, slow, orchestrated, perfumed with wine and expectation. But there's something subtly different in the air. Perhaps a little more silence between courses, or the fact that some guests already show the kind of fatigue that isn't physical. You look around, the smiles remain, the gloves still shine, the waiters maintain their choreography. But there's one detail that betrays the mood. Many left their last dish nearly untouched. The appetite seems tired, the food, repetitive, and the luxury, though intact, begins to feel just a little too heavy. The menu of the final night has gone down in history. Recreated, reprinted, discussed at themed dinners, sold at auctions. It's a piece of thick paper with gold lettering that lists an absurd sequence of dishes. Fresh oysters, consomme olga, salmon with mousseline sauce, filet mignon lily, roast duck, a la francaise, glazed vegetables, Parisian potatoes, and a variety of desserts that could feed a small town. But what was actually served that night? The answer, as always, is unclear. There are reliable accounts from surviving passengers who remember the clear vegetable soup, the duck with peas, the peach ice cream. Others swear lamb was present, as well as the fig pudding. But no one seems to remember the filet mignon, which frankly is a suspicious omission. Historians speculate that the printed menu doesn't reflect exactly what was served. Some ingredients were already running low. The kitchen conditions were beginning to deteriorate, not due to technical failures, but human exhaustion. Tired cooks, slower waiters, a mood of forced festivity. The opulence followed the script, but the soul of the night was already weakening. Even so, the dishes were served. The wine was poured. The desserts landed like jewels on porcelain. There was a kind of insistence on normalcy, a collective desire to keep the play going, even when the pieces were already trembling. You, in this scene, look at your plate with eyes that don't know whether they want to eat or sleep. The background music sounds sadder, or maybe it's just the wine that's dulled your ears too. There's a curious story about that dinner. The menu from the final night was saved by a passenger named Abraham Lincoln Salomon, who hid it in the pocket of his waistcoat, wrapped in wax paper. He survived, and so did the menu. And it's because of that piece of paper that we know Titanic served anchovies with chaufre sauce just hours before it vanished. The image is surreal, a ship of biblical proportions, racing across the Atlantic, while elegantly dressed men and women chew on birds in creamy sauces, with the orchestra playing in the background, ignoring the cold stars outside. The final spoonful of mousse comes with coffee. A gentleman asks for brandy. A lady smiles politely. There's a sense that dinner doesn't end, it dissolves. The dining room slowly empties, as if luxury itself were sleepy. And then, almost imperceptibly, a slight shudder. A glass vibrates, a spoon dances on its saucer. No one notices, or pretends not to. The Titanic continues on its course. In the next part, we'll talk about the menu cards, those pieces of paper that survived the sinking, and the discreet lies they concealed. Because sometimes, the best seasoned truth is the one that was never served. They are small, folded with the precision of a royal invitation. They smell of fresh ink, heavy paper, and a typography that seems to whisper French, even when written in English. The first-class menu cards from the Titanic survived in surprising numbers. Some floated, others were kept in pockets, trunks, memory books, and almost all of them, ironically, are more remembered today than the very dishes they listed. You hold one between your fingers. Menu du dîner, -14. Avril 1912. Everything seems elegant, symmetrical, almost trustworthy. But the first lie is already there. The printed menu doesn't exactly match what was served. Several passengers reported omissions, substitutions, and even dishes invented to give a more sophisticated air to what, in practice, was a last-minute adaptation. Take the filet mignon lily, for example. A dish supposedly composed of thick-cut filet with foie gras and truffles, garnished with Duchess potatoes. It sounds sublime. But there's a catch. No record of the exact recipe exists in any French cookbook of the time. Some historians believe it was invented by the Titanic's chef, naming the dish after a popular actress. Others suggest it was just a fancy name for good old roast beef with mashed potatoes. The menu's function, after all, was more symbolic than informative. A status instrument. Something to impress, not necessarily to explain. What mattered was the sense of abundance, sophistication, the feeling of being surrounded by a world where even the soup's name was sigh-worthy. These menus also concealed practical details. Nothing mentioned, for example, the creative reuse of ingredients. The consomme from the night before could very well have been the base of the next day's soup. The fresh fish may have been thawed hours earlier. And the wine, some bottles had a label pasted over another label. A common practice, especially on ships where marketing mattered as much as taste. There was also the matter of names. Saying Palm's Chateau was more refined than roasted potatoes in chunks. Suprême de Vallée sounded more enchanting than chicken with sauce. Food was elevated to a linguistic spectacle, even if the taste didn't always live up to the typographic fanfare. And then there were the unprinted menus, like those of third class. Rarely preserved, rarely discussed, but equally important. In them, there were no flourishes. Meat soup, bread with butter, tea, sometimes fried fish, sometimes porridge. The food was simple, clear, and direct. A culinary truth that needed no adjectives or borrowed names from Paris. Curiously, one of the few surviving third-class menus shows a meal served on Saturday, April 13th. Rice with raisins and salted meat. Someone kept it. Perhaps as a keepsake, perhaps as a gesture of pride. And today, that piece of paper speaks as much as the golden menus of first class. Perhaps more. In the end, all these menus are a kind of edited memory. An attempt to freeze luxury in time, even when the reality was messier, more improvised, more human. They continue to be reproduced, framed, sold for absurd figures at auctions that turn old paper into relic. And now, with one of them before you, what stands out isn't a dish's name, but what it hides. A list of absences, exaggerations, desires camouflaged in French. A kind of culinary poetry, where truth folds discreetly between courses. In the salon, the lights are still on. The dishes have been cleared, but the taste of the night lingers, and perhaps it's time to return to the first sip, the first aroma. Because, in the end, what defines flavor isn't just the dish, but the moment, and how it deceives. Taste is an illusion, and no one knew that better than the passengers of the Titanic. You close your eyes for a moment, and the taste still lingers. But is it really the taste of the salmon, the wine, the final sweet with gold leaf, or simply the impression of a night that refused to be digested? Taste, after all, is less about the tongue and more about the setting. You don't just savor what's on the plate, you savor the glass, the music, the gaze of your table mate, the weight of the napkin, the memory of a distant childhood when food simply meant food. On the Titanic, everything was amplified. The elegance, the sound, the scent of lavender cream. The dishes took on emotional dimension, even when flavor was, let's say, secondary. And no one dared say the meat was overcooked, that the soup tasted like water with ambition, or that the jelly trembled more from fear than from texture. Emotions and aesthetics shape tastes more than salt or sugar. This is a fact, discussed by neurogastronomists. Yes, that's a real profession. And many of them claim that taste is 80% environment, context, visual suggestion, and emotional memory. The rest is tongue, chemistry, and faith. At the first-class dinner, the food was just one piece in a much larger spectacle. And you, without even realizing it, were convinced that it was all delicious. The spoonful of consomme, the pigeon with Madeira sauce, the fig pudding, all of it would be rejected without ceremony in a modern kitchen. And yet there, it seemed worthy of applause. There was a tacit hierarchy of taste. Pleasure came from rarity, from the name, from the fact that it was being served at sea, surrounded by polished metals and trained gazes. Eating well was, above all, eating as if you knew what you were doing, and asking nothing. It's said that some passengers later confessed they didn't like the menu, but they only said so in interviews, years later. That night, no one dared. Because part of the flavor came from silence, etiquette, the social obligation to be enchanted. And here the Titanic reveals its final culinary trick. It deceived all the senses at once. The heavy cutlery gave a sense of importance. The cold crystal made the wine seem finer. The waiter's uniform added a touch of authority to the dish. The music masked any texture flaw, and the light conversation prevented any deeper critique. That's why, when historians try to recreate the menu today, everything goes wrong. The dishes no longer have the same impact. The sounds are missing. The scents, the arrogance of the dining room, the muffled sound of the sea outside. A fig pudding served at a common table is just a pudding. On the Titanic, it was a gelatinous epiphany. Of course, not all experts agree. Some claim the food was indeed excellent, even by modern standards. Others argue it was all visual, theatrical, and that the real seasoning was the elite's self-deception. The debate continues to float, like a napkin in the wind. But perhaps the most fascinating thing is this: how willing we all are to believe in the taste of things when the setting invites us to. How a memory can be more intense than the original dish. How a dinner can feel eternal, even when it lasted only a few hours. The memory of the dinner persists, not in the stomach that has already surrendered, but in the illusory palate of memory. A taste that, deep down, was never fully real. And even now, with the plates cleared, the candles nearly out, the glasses holding only echoes of wine, there's still something pulsing on the table. A desire to repeat what never quite happened as we remember. Maybe that's why, so many years later, these menus are still recreated. The dinners reenacted. The names of the dishes reprinted on gilded cards. People want to relive the flavor that never existed. It was only felt for an instant. An instant before everything went cold. And the ship, as we already know, did not finish the dinner. But the dinner that survived. Long beyond the shattered china, the sunken bottles, and the jellies that trembled to the end. The first-class menu of the Titanic became legend. Not because it was unforgettable in flavor, but because it was the last banquet served before the ocean corrected arrogance in a single gulp. Decades later, when the memory of the sinking had already blurred into films, museums, and damp coats, something peculiar began to happen. Titanic-themed dinners. Yes, tables recreated with near-pathological precision. Candelabras, porcelain plates, crystal glasses, waiters with rehearsed accents. Guests, dressed as if they had stepped straight out of Southampton in 1912. It was the luxury of first class, resurrected in modern ballrooms, with orchestras playing waltzes, men in suspenders over starched shirts, and women in tiaras inherited from dreaming grandmothers. And of course, the original menu reprinted with care, so everyone could pretend, for one night, that the ocean never happened. You might find this charming, or slightly morbid, depends on the wine. These dinners faithfully reproduce all 10 courses, in the same order, with the same pauses between them. Konsam Olga, fish with muslin sauce, lamb with mint sauce. Pigeons or something that passes as pigeon, sculpted jellies, fig pudding, all there, waiting for a new interpretation. But not everything goes as planned. In 2005, one of these events held with great pomp in London resulted in a collective food poisoning. The salmon, they say, was slightly off. An irony no one missed. At least the experience was authentic, said one guest, before being taken away in an ambulance. The obsessive recreation of the Titanic dinner says a lot about how we romanticize tragedy, and how we seek comfort in the aesthetics of the end. The food becomes a bridge to the past, a sensory portal to something we'd never truly live, but wish we had. And for that, we ignore the taste and embrace the performance. There are modern chefs who dedicate themselves entirely to recreating Belle Epoque recipes. They use old methods, rare ingredients, copper pans that cost more than cars. But when they taste the dishes, they admit, with quiet laughter, that most of the recipes haven't aged well. The techniques, the cooking times, the overly concentrated flavors. It was cuisine meant to impress, not to please. Still, the dinners go on. On ships, in historic hotels, even at charity events. Titanic has become an eternal banquet, served by hands that never stepped aboard. An attempt to freeze time, or at least season it with nostalgia. Curiously, no one recreates the third-class menu. No one pays for oatmeal, porridge, or bread with butter. The luxury of the end of the world always holds more appeal than silent survival. Perhaps because it's prettier to stage. Perhaps because it costs more. The dishes are replicated, the glasses clink, the lights dim. And as guests part with slightly tipsy smiles, the myth of perfect food continues. A myth built on gold leaf, lukewarm soups, and birds no one misses. But in the background, somewhere between the candles and violins, a faint echo of the true flavor of that night remains, a flavor that cannot be replicated, because it wasn't in the sauce, or the wine, or the dessert. It was in the silence that followed, in the sound of ice against hull, in the glass that trembled discreetly before the end. And now, with the glasses cleared, and the menu's memory printed on recycled paper, the dinner fades, not with the taste of something ending, but with the texture of something that was always imagined. The lights dim, the hall darkens, and the final shadows of the banquet slide across the table like crumbs from a story too often chewed. The hall is empty now, not in ruin, not in absolute silence, but in a kind of rest. The chairs still occupy their places, some slightly pulled back, as if they had stood discreetly so as not to interrupt the music. The glasses, half full, rest with wine already surrendered to gravity. A napkin, folded like a resting swan, sleeps atop the porcelain. The dinner no longer exists, only its echo remains. The warm scent of butter, the trace of sweet wine in the air, the muffled sound of an orchestra that is gone, though its notes seem trapped in the high ceiling. The ship moves on, but you no longer feel the motion, only a gentle rocking, as if the ocean were made of cotton. Time on the Titanic was cradled by cutlery, by French names, by discreet odes to ego. But time, as always, devours everything. Even the sauces, even the golden plates, even the foie gras no one knew how to pronounce with conviction. You think about how, behind every ceremonious bite, there was also a longing for home, for warm bread without cutlery, for food that didn't need explaining. It was all beautiful, yes, but also exhausting. And now, with everything cleared, with the setting tidy, and the ocean still out there dark, motionless, almost respectful, you feel. Your body sinks slightly, not from fear, from rest, as if the night too wanted to sleep. There is something deeply human in this ending. The desire to end well, even if the end has already begun. The attempt to keep the music playing, even though the hall is empty. To keep the candles lit, even if no one remains to see them. But perhaps that is the true taste of the Titanic. Not what was served, but what remained. The memory of an impossible meal. Of a moment where luxury bowed to time. Where the most sophisticated course was the silence that followed. And now, as your eyes grow heavy, like stacked china, as your breath follows the rhythm of the invisible sea, you let everything fade slowly. The lights in the hall, the clink of spoons, the polite voices. The pomp, the etiquette, the edible gold, all of it fades. Like a final spoonful of something that was never quite food. Like an elegant dream, served by candlelight. Good night.